Useful extras, and just as it states in the name, useful extras are just some extra assisting tools that you can use as you begin your dressmaking. So firstly, we'll go into the beeswax, and this is just a standard little circle of wax that you can use, and the way it helps you is that it keeps your needles and your thread from twisting up in themselves and creating knots and tangles as you're sewing. So basically all you do is it stands up like this. You move your needle through, and then you sort of hold the back here while you sort of pull it through. And that way it takes the wax as it goes. So I just usually use the moisture in my hands, and I kind of do that. And I also, as a tip, I don't make two things actually. I don't make the threads that long. That way, the shorter it is, the less likely it is to tangle within itself. And I often don't close it depending on what kind of hand sewing I'm doing. If I'm basting, I don't connect the two together. So I usually leave like one uneven thread, and I found that it tangles a lot less when there's just one thread that has to go through. So you do what's best for you. But the next tool that I have here is what we call the awl. And it has this sharp point to it, and you'll see it use it for inserting for buttonholes. It's another way to do a keyhole buttonhole. You'll also use it in pattern making to create some dart holes and different kinds of things. So this can be quite useful. It has a bit of a point, not too much of a point, so you're not in any danger of pricking yourself, but still be careful because it is sharp enough that, you know, enough pressure you could. And this one that I bought actually comes with a nice little cap to it. So I have little ones running around, so it's always good to have some of these safety precautions in place. The next we have is the tweezers. And this came with my serger, but I'm like, where have you been all my life? Because I use it sometimes as I shouldn't be when I'm sewing with my needles inside, with my pins inside my machine. Sometimes it's easier to just kind of grab on and just pull out the stray pins or the pins that I have with these tweezers. And they're really good for different kinds of projects, pin removal, stitches, threads. It's vital when you have a serger to assist you in threading the serger. You may not need it as much when you're threading a regular sewing machine, but when you have a serger, it's kind of like really difficult to thread the serger without these tweezers. Okay, the next tool we have is our liquid sealant, and we call it Fray Check. And you might be wondering, all right, what do I use this for? I often use it to seal like frayed edges, as the name says. For example, like if you have like this kind of chiffon fabric and where you see there's like a lot of fraying, and especially when you're doing like hand sewing or you're trying to finish it, it almost feels like it's never, you know, if you're trying to finish a particular seam, like if I fold it like this, and for example, if I'm just folding it again, you'll see that there's like fraying there that you don't want to catch on the seam. And I mean, and you can go and you can cut it, but it's a lot easier to just kind of take the Fray Check. Then I can get a drop out of here and just like run it along the edge. And there's a little bit of a smell to it, but it's not too bad. And then let it dry. You have to be very careful, especially when you're doing this with fine fabrics. Why? Because it does leave a mark. So I only do it when the seam is when it dries and the seam is going to be closed, like a hem, or when I'm doing like particular kinds of sleeves and there's going to be some sort of fold where you're not going to see it anymore. You don't use this if you're going to see it, because there's going to be an obvious liquid mark there, because it does leave that mark there. So like I said, I use it often when I'm dealing with these kinds of fabrics, especially like chiffons and things that fray a lot. And I want to seal it in, but also I'm going to cover it so you're not going to see the way this is going to almost dry white. So that's what we use the Fray Check for. Close that back up. Okay, the next we have is the Thimble, and like I said, you use this as sort of a protectant when you are hand sewing. I would say this, the earlier you become familiar with it, the better it is for your fingers. As you probably noticed from the video, my fingers definitely are maker fingers. They are not, you know, particularly nice. There's a lot of cuticle damage. There's a lot of stuff going on here because I'm so focused on just the project and not so much my hands. But if you got closer, you see like prick marks where I've like pricked my finger like a million times, especially with hand sewing. So if you can become familiar with using a thimble, I would say, you know, it's never too late to learn and just become comfortable with using the thimble. I also have this example, and it's just a square of pattern paper. So for those of you who are in the advanced course, you will need to acquire this kind of paper, and this is just standard pattern paper, and it's going to help you create your own patterns, and it's also going to be a good useful assistant if you need to alter a pattern. And it's much wider and bigger, but I just cut off a portion just to make sure you can see it in the recording. And it usually has some sort of marking. It could be numbers, letters here, and they're usually about an inch apart, and that's going to be very helpful to you as you're creating a pattern, at least knowing that these markings are often 1 inch apart. And as you'll see in the future when you go into making the pattern, how useful that will be. So this is another useful extra, but I say useful is if you're not intending to do anything with pattern making your own patterns, this may just be something helpful. But if you are intending to delve deeper into pattern making, you need pattern paper. Okay. Something I've discovered over time is this other sort of pattern tracing paper, and I know you can see it's very transparent. I've actually grown to really love this kind of paper. It's another sort of tracing pattern technique that you can use. If you've ever been to the doctor, they always have this sheet that goes across the, I think it's a chair, or this little bed that's used to get examined on, and it kind of feels crinkly and it's very sheer. This is actually dynamite for tracing patterns and tracing different kinds of things. It's much more narrow than the pattern paper when you have it like fully out. So the pattern paper is much wider, but this is much more narrow. It definitely is the paper that they use in the doctor's office. What I enjoy about it is it's great for tracing patterns and altering and mimicking things. Sometimes I even put it on the actual garment itself. Like I'll lay it on top of the dress form and then sort of just like trace it out because it's so transparent, whereas you don't get that transparency that much with the actual pattern paper, as you can see. So I like it because it's more transparent. It allows me to just like lay it on top of a particular thing and trace around it, where I'm not going to get that transparency with the pattern paper. So actually I have both. Okay, the next we have is the glue stick. I don't have an example here, but the glue stick is what you're going to use in conjunction with Scotch tape when you're altering patterns, so that you can kind of attach those pieces together. So you definitely want to have just a standard craft supply glue stick with your patterns, as well as the Scotch tape. I have this magnifying glass that I use if I'm trying to just go in and see if there's any areas where maybe there's a loose thread, or just maybe just to kind of survey the garment to make sure that I'm not missing anything, because sometimes when you're working on a project for a little bit, your perception is kind of a little bit off because you've been focusing too much. So you might sometimes want to just like take a break and then return to a garment, because again, between this and the magnifying glass, you want to make sure you have a chance for your eyes to rest a little bit before you go in and to continue to finish the garment. So now we're going to focus on the dress form, and I just kind of want to give you guys a bit of an overview of some of the dress forms that I own and what I use them for. So we're going to go to the dress forms. Okay, so this is the squad right here. This is my dressmaking squad. These are some of the dress forms that I use when I am doing my sewing. So first I have just my standard dressmaking form, and she has an arm attached. I actually have an arm for both, but I just decided to just do the one arm. I'm going to bring her forward. I have a diagram where I label exactly all the parts of the dress form, which are very important, especially when you're doing your draping. You want to become familiar with what each of these lines mean, because they all mean something, especially, like I said, when you're draping and when you're using your style tape and those kinds of things. Now, you probably want to know, is it vital to have a dress form? Well, it definitely depends. It depends on who you're sewing for and what type of sewing you're doing. I found it to be vital if you're doing draping, because draping means to literally drape on, and unless you intend to constantly have a stream of human beings that are willing to let you drape and pin on them, this is your best option if you're draping. And you can get it in a variety of sizes. You can do your size. I'm going to show you something that is called a fitting system that allows you to change the sizes depending on if you're dressing or if you're doing designs for different sizing. And again, this is just a standard dress form. Again, if you wanted to be a professional seamstress or professional sewer and sew for other people, you would probably need a couple of these things in different sizes to sort of assist you as far as like creating designs and measurements and different things like that, because you want to see it on something or on someone so that you can better assess what needs to be done. As far as price points, it really depends on, like most things, when you're talking about brand identity. The Stockman dress forms are the height of all dress forms, and they're obviously more expensive. Just like if you are doing a Juki sewing machine versus the standard sewing machines, there's definitely a Porsche or Ferrari version of anything you can imagine, and it's no different when you're concerning dressmaking and dress forms. I'd say you want to spend an excess of between $300 and $400 to get a good sturdy one. I often see people use the ones like we have the example in the book, and the ones that are adjustable. I've had one of those before. I don't particularly like them because of the groove that it has in the middle, which is great if you're beginner and you're starting out and you want to try different things and you just want to start off with something that is easy to use and not super expensive. Definitely start off with that. Over time, I didn't like it because, like I said, that groove in the middle makes it very hard to mark and do different kinds of designs when you have essentially a hole in the middle of two very important seams, and that is the center front and the center back seams. When you have those huge, and the side seams, when you have these huge holes, in order to make room for the adjustments, it makes it kind of difficult to do your marking and your draping. So over time, I phased out of them, and also I didn't find it to be particularly sturdy as far as moving them around. They tended to break apart pretty easily, and I had a Singer one, so it wasn't like I got a really, really poor quality. I had a Singer one, so it just didn't hold up. So over time, I moved towards these guys. Like I said, she comes with a detachable sleeve, and I actually have both sleeves, and it's great for when I'm making sleeve garments to get proportion and those kinds of things. And I also make sure I get it in a variety of sizes because I sew for clientele, and I have to be able to cater to different body types. We all have different body shapes, types, height, and you want to be able to cater to different body types and different shapes. And the best way to do that is to try to get at least 10 sizes in between each one. Again, even this size 18 is not true to size. You're gonna, all bodies are different, so you're gonna have different proportions. And the way that I sort of like counter that is I have something called a fitting system. And you wanna see? I got this off of Amazon, but it's an actual company called Fabulous Fit. And it's basically, and you can actually make these yourself. I don't trust me trying to make the proportions for this, and I find like it's sometimes certain things aren't worth the time and effort when you can just pay for it. So I found that these have been like a game changer as far as like especially fitting for clients. And essentially it's just a series of different kinds of padding, and it comes with this pullover, and you pull it over I'm not going to do it for this example, but essentially you pull it over here, and then you start to fill in and pad the dress form. So you do the measurements of each part of the body, and we'll cover measurements in the future. You do your measurements, and then you take those measurements and you replicate it on the form. And it is like a game changer if you're dressing for yourself, if you're definitely doing for clients, because you get to have more realistic body proportions when you're using the fitting system. So although it was not in the book, I definitely encourage you, whether it's sewing for yourself or if you're going to sew for clientele, to purchase a fitting system, and that way you'll have more accurate results, especially when you're trying to work out some custom designs and pattern making and draping. You don't want to guess especially when you start to get into more expensive fabrics. You don't want to have to constantly be recutting because you were off about the measurement. So I would definitely say that a good investment is the fitting system in addition to your dress form. So what other kinds of dress forms do I use? So the half scale dress form is just basically, and this is what some of the tutorials are going to be on the half scale dress form, and it's just a miniature of a normal dress form. And this one has a quick drape that I did on it, and it's just a miniature of the normal dress form. And this is a time saving, and it's a fabric saving, and it's great for practice. I would say if you're not ready to move on to the bigger dress forms or even the adjustable dress forms, I would definitely encourage you to get a half scale. When we go on to the pattern making portion, there's going to be half scale slopers that you're going to be able to use in conjunction with this, so you can go crazy as far as practicing. And that way, what I like about this is it uses obviously a lot less fabric, so that you can play around with some concepts you may have without spending a lot of money on fabric that may go to waste. So it's definitely good for practice and pattern making and definitely draping. So I definitely encourage you to get a half scale dress form. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Videos are uploaded weekly covering dressmaking, fashion, lectures, and more.